New iPads are coming out within the week. It's the iPad Pro M4 and the iPad Air M2. Way back when this channel was just beginning, I was doing a lot of stuff with drawing tablets. So for me, iPad, of course, it's a revolutionary device. I've had it since day one. The original iPad came out. I lined up at the Apple Store in the UK so that I could get one. I've always loved the device, but it really came into its own when the Apple Pencil came out with iPad Pro. After the tablet came out, a lot of other cool technology came out. You got smart watches. Now there's a lot of AI stuff happening. And then, VR was also exploding. But what's really interesting is how the iPad has maintained its space as like this really important form factor. Apple keeps making iPads with insane power. Now, a lot of people, very famous YouTubers often talking about how the iPad has a lot of power and they keep putting new chips into it, but they don't seem to change very much about the OS. And that's frustrating. It's like, why don't they just put Mac OS into it so that it can replace the Mac? I think the issue here is that if it actually had Mac OS, it wouldn't replace the Mac. It would just be a Mac that can't do things very conveniently because it doesn't have a keyboard all the time. It would just be frustrating every time you needed to do something that doesn't have a keyboard. So what's really interesting with iPad Pro M4, the newest versions which are coming out in 2024, what's really exciting about them is the way that it's continuing to make its own path. It's trying to forge its own path without just being a not quite as good Mac. It doesn't run Mac OS, it runs iPad OS. It runs iPad OS way better than any other device, obviously, because nothing else runs iPad OS. But I think that's important because there are a lot of situations, probably more times in the day, when I would prefer to be holding my iPad and not my Mac. And when I say a Mac, I just mean a computer or a laptop. I just prefer to be using a tablet. Although I do think that maybe it's not super healthy to constantly be working all the time. I do appreciate not having to sit in the laptop position and do things the laptop way. When I could be chilling out, watching a movie that I've already seen 3 or 4 times with my wife. We're just watching a rerun of a movie and I'm just tinkering around with my iPad and doing a few edits. I love that there's so much that I can do casually, even though maybe to some extent it's extracting me from not being fully focused on family time. What's exciting about the iPad Pro is that they're continuing on with this. It's just an iPad. Stop trying to make it a Mac. Obviously, we want to give it a lot of the capabilities of the Mac, but not so that it can be a Mac, so that it can replace your Mac. Really, what is the future of the Mac laptop? How much do we really need the Mac laptop if iPad OS can do things better? In fact, there are so many ways that you can use an iPad that you just wouldn't use a laptop. The fact that a laptop has a keyboard attached means that you can't really hold it up. But even when they showed those demo videos of people recording videos actually with an iPad, holding up an iPad with 4 different multicam streams coming in, it actually works. You could be recording through the camera of the iPad, but also monitoring another scene that someone else is using. And then you could switch. You could touch, or you could have some sort of physical device. Whatever it is, I wouldn't hold up my laptop to do something like that. And that's just a major boon, I guess, of the tablet form factor. The other thing I want to talk about today is just that I obviously am interested in it because it's a drawing device. For me, pencil input, it's obviously for Apple, it's not just because you can draw with it. In fact, they have an Apple Pencil that doesn't even have pressure sensitivity. It's really just for taking notes and doodling around. Maybe you don't need pressure sensitivity all the time. But for me, being able to use it as a drawing tool is really exciting. And I've decided to actually go for the iPad Pro instead of the iPad Air. So this is the second thing I want to talk about really, is that if you're choosing between the iPad Pro and the iPad Air, they're double the price, okay? An iPad Pro comes in Japan, it's the base level iPad Pro is 220,000 yen, which is something like $1,500. I think it starts in actual dollars in the West, it starts at $1,300, and for the iPad Air, it starts at $800. We're talking about a $500 price difference between a device that's $800 and $1,300. It's almost like if you just worked a little bit harder, you could buy two iPads. In fact, I think the iPad 11-inch starts at $599, right? So it's like 600 or 800. So it's like you could actually buy two iPad Airs, the 13-inch one and an 11-inch one, and use them in different places. Like personally, if I had two, actually I do have two of the original iPad Pros, but like I could use the 11-inch one as my daily driver for taking notes and all that, and I could use the 13-inch model for content creation or just organizing things when I need a bigger calendar view. But instead of buying two cheaper iPads, I have decided to go for the more expensive one. And I'll explain this probably when the device comes out as well. I'll unbox it and I'll actually test it a little bit. But if you are on the fence, like it's coming out in a few days and you want to decide which one to buy, I do think that it's worth considering that even though there is a 13-inch iPad Air and it's significantly cheaper, there are a few things that it doesn't have that the previous iPad Pro did. iPad Air 13-inch basically has almost all the specs of the previous iPad Pro, the M2 version. So it's like basically you can get an iPad Pro of a couple of years ago for the price of the iPad Air, and in my opinion, it's very, very competitive. In fact, the base level model has 128 gigabytes, so it's not even like a 64 gigabyte device, which is like just barely enough to get a few apps on there and iPad OS and actually function properly. You really needed to upgrade to 128 gigs, which meant that you were spending a little extra, so it's like you're closer to just iPad Pro price anyway, so you just bought the iPad Pro. Now, at 128 gigs of storage, you actually get a really, really capable, almost iPad Pro for $500 less than the 13-inch iPad Pro M4. But they have taken out some of the key features that make it Pro. Obviously, the M4 is going to be super fast, and I think that in real-world use, I mean, I haven't tested either of them, I'm assuming that the M2 iPad Air will probably take you very, very far for like 5 or 6 years probably without ever feeling sluggish. It's an incredible processor, the M2, right? But the bigger difference that they've taken out, which will feel different on a daily basis, every minute and every second that you're using it, it's the fact that the Air doesn't have the Pro Motion display. That's what they just call a 120 hertz display. Thing is, I also like gaming handhelds, and as you know on this channel, I've reviewed the Steam Deck, I've also reviewed the Asus ROG Ally, I've reviewed the Aya Neo Air 1S, and of all of those devices, I still use the ROG Ally the most. And why? 120 hertz. It's one of those features which doesn't seem that important on paper. It's like all my games run at 30 FPS or 60 FPS. Why would I need 120 hertz? It's just what you're looking at physically just changes. All the menus just are smoother. In actual gameplay, there are some games that can take advantage of that higher refresh rate in order to show you motion a little faster so you get better response times. Even if you're not playing games on your iPad, 120 hertz can make a huge difference. It's not just 120 hertz, it's a variable refresh rate. It makes a big difference in the experience. And I know that because I have an iPhone. This is an iPhone 13 Pro Max, and it has a ProMotion display. And maybe it's hard if you're not used to seeing displays like this, but for me, it's night and day. When you look at a screen that's 60 hertz, it's like when I discovered that 60 hertz games were significantly better than 30 hertz games. Maybe it will just continue and maybe it just never ends. Maybe eventually I'll not be able to play on anything lower than 480 hertz. Hopefully I don't reach that point, but I do think that 120 hertz is like the premium sweet spot, as opposed to 60 hertz is the sweet spot. You don't really need it to be faster than that. None of the movies you're watching are faster than 60 hertz. None of the games that you're playing require more than 60 hertz. Like if you play games at 60 FPS, it's gonna be a smooth experience. But 120 hertz is one of those things that will make you feel different on a daily basis. Like, oh, it feels less sluggish. not unnecessary thing. You can live your life with 60 hertz. It won't feel sluggish, but once you're used to 120 hertz, it's like, oh, this is a nice premium thing. Now, the reason I've decided to spend the extra cash is because, remember, it could have cost me $500 less to go for the Air, and it would have been very fast and very capable. But for me, I haven't upgraded my iPad Pro since 2015. That's right. I'm like a tech YouTuber, and the most recent iPad Pro I have is the two that I bought in 2015 and 2016, the Generation 1 iPad Pros, which means that my current iPad Pro, which is the 13-inch, it is almost 9 years old. That's an insane amount of time in the tech YouTube world. There are very few YouTubers out there who like review products and go, yeah, but I'm still using the one from 9 years ago. Some prominent YouTubers are still like, my iPad Pro that I bought 4 years ago is still doing well. Okay, and that's like pushing it. But a lot of these YouTubers often have the most recent one. Every single year or every 2 years when a new iPad Pro model or a slight refresh comes out, they get the new one and test and see how the features compare. I haven't upgraded my iPad Pro since 2015. So coming up on 9 years, I'm like, if I'm going to invest over $1,000 on something, or almost $1,000 on something, should I get the one that is kind of the same experience as what I already have, just with enough power to run modern stuff? Or do I go a little extra and get like the new generation, actually experience the next generation? It's almost like the tiers between like buying a Series X and a Series S. If you buy the Xbox Series X, it's the top of the top Xboxes with all of the cool new features and everything. If you buy the Series S, it's got everything you need to run all the games on the platform, but it just doesn't have some of those next generation, well, now current generation features. So I feel like if you're on the fence with the iPad Pro, you're trying to decide whether you should buy the Air 13-inch, because now there is one, like there wasn't one before, or the iPad Pro 13-inch, the decision is a lot harder than before, because before you could only choose the 11-inch Air. If you needed 13-inch, you had no choice. You had to buy the Pro. Now you can get the full experience with the pencil. You can even use the new Apple Pencil Pro with all of the barrel roll and tilt, everything, all the cool features. It will work on the iPad Air, apparently. But for me, upgrading an almost 9-year-old device, it's like, well, if I'm gonna spend $1,000 on this, I may as well get like the daily feel of all the premium, like the current gen stuff. Like this is the current generation. If I'm going to upgrade at all, I want to actually feel every day the benefits of the next generation, and not just, well, I need an upgrade because my old one is slightly not handling it very well. That's essentially what's actually happening with my current iPad Pro. For content consumption, it's handling everything like a beast still. It runs videos, can stream things, I've got all my subscription services, they're still fine. For content consumption, it's fine, but I'm a little frustrated that I don't use my iPad for creative things the way that I used to. The second reason I don't actually use it for creative things is not really a fault of the device. I've just lost my iPad. I've lost my Apple Pencil. I actually have 2 Apple Pencils, and I lost both of them. Very embarrassing. I'm very sorry to say that, and it's very embarrassing because that's an expensive thing to lose. I didn't want to buy another Apple Pencil Generation 1 to work on my iPad Pro when I could just wait for the next iPad Pros to come out or iPad Air to come out and just buy whatever new pencil comes with that, 2nd generation, or now, as you can see, 3rd, I guess 4th generation, the Apple Pencil Pro. So that's not really to do with the technology, just I lost my Generation 1 Apple Pencil. It made no sense to buy another Generation 1 pencil when I could just wait for the new ones to come out. Anyway, I know that was a waffling discussion about that, and I just basically wanted to make this video because I quite enjoy waffling discussions about things. Sometimes it's a bit like, here are the 10 things you need to know about the iPad Pro. Those videos are really helpful when someone's like in a rush. I just need to know the decision right now. But if you want to like just chill out, hang out with me and go through this thought process slowly. Basically, I've come to the point where I've discovered, yes, the iPad Air will handle almost everything. I can't really think of anything that it wouldn't, because the Pro apps, Final Cut and Logic Pro, apparently those will work on the iPad Air. Don't quote me, I'll double check the information later, but pretty sure it said as long as you have an M2 processor or faster iPad, then you'll be able to run the Pro apps, Final Cut and Logic Pro. I think also, just as a creative, it interests me to not just experience things that I've been missing out on for the past few years, but I want to see stuff that's on the bleeding edge. Like, I don't know how many of all these features, it wasn't very clear to me whether the multicam editing thing was also going to work on the iPad Air. I wasn't sure if like that was going to be, I wasn't sure if that was going to require the M4 for that. But the other thing is that AI is a big deal this year. I'm not like obsessed with AI or anything, but with neural engines and AI, I am very curious about seeing what's on the bleeding edge of Apple tech. So this felt like a good opportunity to get into that zone, like bleeding edge tech, as opposed to, well, my old device is getting long in the tooth and I want to finally be able to do the things that other people have been doing for the past few years. That's not exactly what I was trying to do with this iPad. I was like, I want a device that will get me into that zone where I can experience bleeding edge stuff. Anyway, if that's how you're thinking as well, then you might want to consider the iPad Pro instead of the Air model. Listen, that's all I wanted to talk about today. I'm really excited about my new iPad coming, and hopefully I'll be able to make some videos about the tech aspect of it here. And if you're interested in more specific things like drawing and that experience, I do have a sub-channel. It's called Focused Lines. Be sure to check out this video next if you're interested in tablets, drawing devices, and that sort of thing. I've been NihongoGamer. I'll see you real soon. Oh, by the way, the reason all this coffee gear is here because I made a coffee video right before I made this video.